All right.
Sarah, tell us, everyone, a little bit about your background and who you are, and then your journey and
Yeah. I think, I work with children and adolescents and adults, and I do specialise in, trauma, complex trauma, and just all those comorbid things that go with it. I'm an EMDR trainer and consultant, but polyvagal fits in with all of my work, and it's taken me back to, I think, the home where I began. I did a PhD on the psychophysiology of EMDR, and so the body and the nervous system's always been like an interest to me. Like I see it and I feel it in the sessions, and with EMDR, I can't help but see the nervous system like go up and down, and it's just always been not just intuition, but a scientific interest as to what's happening in the body. And for some reason, I just got a bit lost, I think, along the way. And, things happen and research takes a different direction. And you spend so much time learning about other approaches, attachment and family therapy and sand tray and, ACT and mindfulness and schema. And we spend so much time learning. And it's only in the last 5 years that I've really gone back to the body. And I feel like there's been a piece missing. Like it really has been a journey of, because I think EMDR as a therapy, it's amazing and wonderful, and it explains so many. It's transdiagnostic. Like the theory of EMDR is the adaptive information processing model, which we can talk about if need be. But it is a transdiagnostic, theoretical way of looking at presentations. Like we are who we are because of everything that's happened to us, and it has this beautiful explanation of memory. And I think most of the trauma therapies, like the big four therapies, they all have this AIP, this information processing model, as their theoretical foundation. And we all believe that any human being on the planet, no matter what age, can process information, which means we can recover and heal from trauma in the right circumstances. But trauma therapy and these big four therapies, in order to process memories, we have to be regulated. Like the body has to be within what we've all referred to as the window of tolerance for years. So we have to have a sense of safety and connection and regulation in order to process memory. And I think for years I've said, you can't do trauma work without somebody who holds the client in mind. It's just, you just can't. If there's a block in therapy, it's generally because the client can't regulate, or there's no one. They don't have anyone in the outside world who can give them the message they're loved, they're cared for, they're protected, they're safe, and a calm nervous system that can hold them out of the session. But where's the science for that? I think for years, I've been missing the science of attachment and safety and connection. And then Deb Dana, she just provides the most, beautiful way of bringing polyvagal therapy into the therapy room. And so I just can't talk about trauma and therapy and EMDR without talking about attachment and safety, without talking about polyvagal. So polyvagal, and I guess Deb Dana's work in particular, is just an everyday part of my language. And I just don't know how I would do processing with clients and get to that second phase of therapy, which is the memory processing phase, without, that science of attachment that polyvagal gives. So it excites me. It's been my missing piece of the puzzle for a really long time. Yeah.
I can see you've been doing a lot of thinking about how all these pieces fit together, and so maybe just sort of say, what exactly is EMDR?
EMDR. So EMDR is it's a psychotherapeutic framework in and of itself. So I think one of the it's a treatment for trauma. It's an evidence-based treatment for PTSD and complex PTSD for children, adults and adolescents. So across the ages, it's evidence-based for. But EMDR is, the way we teach it is, it's like a technique, like it's a way of processing memory, but it is a framework. It's an 8-phased, quite structured therapeutic approach. And the theory behind it is this adaptive information processing model. So we believe that as humans, trauma or any presentation, whether it's separation anxiety, social anxiety, specific fears. We are who we are based on our experiences and memory. So when memories are negative or they give us messages of not being loved or cared for, we develop ways of thinking about ourselves, the world, and others that can either be adaptive and healthy or not adaptive. So EMDR is a way of, it's a framework for an entire therapeutic approach. So the way we take history is phase one and preparation. We're not just looking at symptoms, we're looking at where they've come from and the history of that. So EMDR is a way of taking history, conceptualizing a case, thinking about what is the struggle here. It doesn't matter what the symptoms are, but where did they come from? Where did they emerge? What is it that's happened in the client's life that's led them to be thinking, feeling, and behaving this way? But in a polyvagal sense, what's happened to their nervous system for them to be thinking and behaving and reacting this way? And then once our clients, we have a preparation phase, which is phase 2 in EMDR. And this is before we get into memory processing. And a lot of people think of preparation as a stabilization phase, but I've struggled with that for so long. We cannot expect to have stabilization when our clients' memories are so intrinsically stuck, or that we keep getting triggered and triggered and triggered. It's really impossible to expect that a client can be stable before we go into memory processing, because their nervous system is impacted day in, day out by these things that are triggered over and over and over again. So in EMDR, we have phase 1 and phase 2, history, preparation. And in preparation, what we're doing is creating what's called integrative capacity. So we're creating the ability for clients to process memory, which is phases 3, 4, 5, and 6 in EMDR. We're processing memory, which what we're doing is we're looking at and we're conceptualizing the events that have happened in the client's life and how that drives the current symptom. So we're picking one symptom at a time. And clients can present with 15, 20 therapeutic goals, particularly complex PTSD, but we're picking one symptom at a time, looking at the history of that, and we're processing that by asking the clients to think about that event, the thoughts that go with it, the negative and the positive thoughts. We're looking at the feelings that go with it and where they feel it in the body. So in EMDR, the nervous system's on, we're activating this memory. And we're sitting with that and creating a space in therapy where the client's own mind can make sense of that experience in a different way. But in the processing phases of EMDR, if the body is on, if their nervous system is outside of their window of tolerance, or if they're not socially connected to us, processing stops. And so in EMDR, in the memory processing phase, you have to have connection to that ventral vagal system. So the weird thing about EMDR is we get clients to think about their memories and we distract them somehow. And mostly with adult clients, we use those, strange eye movements. And what the eye movements are doing, or with younger clients, we play with a ball, we do hand tapping, we hold little therapy, we do games together to regulate and co-regulate. So in EMDR, we are processing memories by going into a fight and flight state or a shutdown state where those memory networks are stored. And we'll do that for a moment, come back to social engagement. So we're processing a memory, coming back to connection, processing a memory, coming back to connection. So clients cannot process memories without having a social engagement system with you. And then phase 8 in EMDR is integration. So we're making sure that once we've processed these memories, which we can only do if our clients are connected to us and regulating, that the client's social system, academic system, they're developmentally back on track. So after memories are processed, we are doing this integration phase, which is typically thought of as, integration in, so I guess the evidence-based treatment for complex trauma is phase 1, preparation, stabilization, phase 2, memory processing, and phase 3 is integration phase. So all of the big 4 evidence-based treatments for trauma, whether it's prolonged exposure, EMDR, cognitive processing therapy, CBT for trauma focus, they all are considered to be these phase-based treatments. And EMDR is as well. I think I want to make it clear on the podcast and for all of our listeners is that it's not just a technique, it is a full therapeutic approach. And I think you can probably hear from how I'm talking is that I think EMDR gives us the science of memory, like a transdiagnostic way of viewing how we are as human beings, how our schemas, beliefs and symptoms develop. But the way we process memory is dependent on the nervous system being regulated. So if you think about trauma-focused therapy, in any approach, you have to have safety and regulation before you can process memory. So the science of that is something that I've been missing. So that's what polyvagal is giving me, I think, in the last few years, is a way of talking about and a language to what we're all doing as therapists. Like intrinsically, we know how to regulate our clients and manage their big emotions. But I don't think we've really understood the science of that in a way that Stephen Porges presents that to us. So that's exciting.
I think you've just done a beautiful way of explaining that. I mean, I've done like a level 1 EMDR training, and I certainly did not have that sort of overview framework coming out from my training. So, and I think you've blended in lovely, the work you heard from Deb, Dana, and polyvagal, and I think that connection, that it's the connection of keeping people grounded as they're doing some work and moving to those memories. You explained that lovely. Yeah. So in those, I know you sort of said you don't like to use that sort of those words in the beginning, the stabilization phase or the preparation phase.
Yeah.
What kind of things are EMDR trained therapists typically doing during that time? Because from what I understand, that can be quite a lengthy experience, because you say if you've got a nervous system that's dysregulated, you can't do any of that processing sort of, finger eye movement or distracting sort of activity. Am I right?
That's right. I mean, I think, oh my gosh, I've always struggled with what we call the stabilization phase. And I know from my level 1 and probably yours as well, that it wasn't even a focus of therapy, of learning EMDR. We learn the technique, which is phases, 3 to 7, assess the memory, activate it, think about all the beliefs and how it feels in your body. We get the SUDS down to 0, VOC up to 7, and then we check the body. So that's what we learn in level 1. And the stabilization phase is something that's bothered me my entire EMDR career, because I remember going, I think it was my first conference in Amsterdam, and it was just this overwhelming, there's about 2,000 or 3,000 people there. And I thought, oh my God, I didn't even know there's this many people trained in EMDR in the world at this point. And the whole nature of the conference was this stabilization phase, like how much is needed, how long does it go for, what are we meant to be doing? And to be honest, I see EMDR as a framework, and I think if the framework fits you, like the theory of it, it starts to overarch your whole way of seeing a case and working with clients and conceptualize it. And you bring in all the tools that you already know and do for that stabilization phase. So the stabilization phase, you could be using mindfulness things to ground the client. You could be, using behavioral things to get them to be doing things that are kind of self-care. But there's no textbook for this stabilization phase because every client has a different history and how it's impacting them. Every client has different human beings in their world that are safe or unsafe. Every client is different in the way their nervous system has learned to trust or distrust others, and how they'll seek connection and safety in the preparation phase. We all have different internal resources and external supports. Our nervous systems are different. So every single human being that comes into the clinic, they've got some form of regulation because they've made it there, like somehow. But everyone needs something different, and that really depends on your therapeutic approach and the type of clients and presentations and ages that you work with. So what I'll do with a 4-year-old is very different than a 10-year-old. It's quite different from a 75-year-old. but there's no textbook approach. And I think there's, I don't know whether you're familiar with the debate at the moment. There's huge debates in the literature about how much stabilization is really needed. And across the therapies, like the big four therapies, you know, there's a lot of research out there showing that complex presentations, like complex PTSD, people can respond to these protocols, EMDR, prolonged exposure, cognitive processing, without an extended stabilization phase. But there has to be something. And I think the I call it preparations. I'm really moving away from stabilization because I think it tricks us into thinking that that's what we need in this preparation phase. But what we need in the early stages of trauma therapy is the client's ability to integrate information, and memory. So if you think about memory, what we're aiming for, actually, no, I'm going to take it back. If you think about the diagnostic category of trauma, like complex PTSD, so the ICD-11 has a beautiful definition of complex trauma, whereas the DSM-5 sadly took that diagnostic category out. But the ICD-11 define complex trauma as simple PTSD, so hypervigilance, avoidance, and the re-experience, with this extra layer of clients with complex trauma have inability in regulating emotions, like pervasive inability to regulate their nervous system. They have no social engagement system. They're flipping between fight and flight and shutdown all the time. They also need self-compassion. So there's the ICD-11 highlights that people with complex trauma have pervasive negative beliefs. Like, I don't matter, it's my fault, I'm bad, shame and guilt, self-blame. And you see that in all ages. But the ICD-11 in the complex trauma definition says that we struggle with attachment and connection. So clients who present with complex trauma have inabilities regulating, they struggle with attachment, and they have a lot of negative self-beliefs. So in the preparation phases of trauma therapy, you need the antidote to those three things. So if you are going to have integrative capacity in the preparation phase, so if clients can process memory, they need the antidote to those three things. So they need to be able to regulate their emotions. They have to understand their nervous system and how it works. They need connection. They need somebody who can give them a message that they're loved and cared for and protected. If you have co-regulation and connection, you have better regulation. And you need, in that preparation phase, some level of self-compassion and self-care. If you have no one in the world, though, if you have no human being on the planet that cares about you and holds you in mind, how are you meant to have self-compassion? Because there's no one giving you the message that you matter, you're cared for, you're loved, you're seen, you're heard, you're safe. So the whole preparation phase, I think, in EMDR depends crucially on this ability to have another human being in the world with a nervous system that can hold yours. And I really think that the preparation phase, and I know it, I mean, I've made mistakes in therapy across the years. I think I do teach EMDR, and I only have the confidence to teach it knowing that I've made most of the mistakes you can make. But if you go into process memory and the client doesn't have somebody in the world who cares about them, and I used to say, oh, you need a secure attachment in order to process memory, because you need someone to regulate them, hold them, someone who's not you, that's not paid for, someone who can give them the message that they're loved and cared for and protected, someone who can regulate their nervous system outside of session. But we don't need a secure attachment. We need someone who wants to be a secure attachment, but we need someone with a nervous system that can hold the child or the friend or whoever it is that your client chooses. Without that, what you're doing to a client is you're opening up these deep, dark memory systems. And if the trauma is relational, meaning if their trauma is, the perpetrator of the trauma is someone in their attachment system. So if my caregiver is also my source of fear, or they're giving me the message that I don't matter and I'm unloved, if I'm neglected, if I'm abused, if my trauma is relational. We're going into those memory systems, and what the client needs to heal is the message that that was over, that was the past. Right now, I am loved, I am cared for, I've got people around me, I'm safe and supported. If you open up processing without someone who can hold the client and can give them the message that they are loved and cared for, you're opening up the memory network without any way out. It's like you're digging them into a deep, dark hole, but you've got no rope or ladder to get to the other side. And you will end up with clients who get stuck, who block, whose memory systems won't even go where you need to go to. The body will defend that. It's like, no, I can't go there. It's too painful, because it's still reality. But you'll end up with clients who fall into that deep, dark depression. And I've seen it.
Oh my gosh, Sarah, everything you have just said is exactly what we talk about in terms of the Safe and Sound protocol, the safe before the sound. You know,
yes.
We have learned so much since the protocol was first released, you know, virtually 3 years ago, when it really was all about the acoustic intervention. And over the time and the feedback from practitioners that our understanding and really embedding polyvagal within this understanding of the acoustic intervention is the importance of the safe before the sound. And everything you just talked about is exactly what we try and are weaving into the training for the Safe and Sound protocol. And that is evolving over these three years, because just as I'm sure EMDR, because I was actually rather surprised when I realised just how long EMDR intervention has been around. It has been
30 years.
I know. It's been around a long time, but I'm sure when it first started, it didn't have all that extensive framework.
No, you're right. It was a desensitization model, which means it was just about processing fear.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just, it was like, Shapiro's, the 1989 first studies were about picking a traumatic event, a single trauma event, and desensitizing it. It was just going to the trauma, coming back, going to the trauma, coming back, and getting SUDS every time. The protocol has expanded, and it's expanded to reprocess more history. So it's more for complex trauma now. And but in order to go into that deep, dark history, it's not just about processing fear anymore. It's about processing, I'm not loved, I'm not safe, I'm not protected, I'm alone, I'm unsafe in the world. There's a lot of schemas and meaning that comes up when you go into childhood trauma and relational trauma. That has not just a fear response, but a shutdown response. And if a client shuts down, you know that in processing, if their nervous system shuts down, you'll hit block after block after block. But you'll also not even get into those memory systems. Or shutdown looks like calm, doesn't it? You're opening up memories.
Exactly.
Think, oh, yes. So it's really important to have this understanding of the nervous system and safety before you go in. Yeah, sorry, Joanne.
No, I think you just said lovely, and everything that we're really trying to expand in the understanding of the Safe and Sound protocol is everything exactly what you just sort of shared about somebody having an understanding of their own autonomic nervous system, what seems to be triggers, what seems to be, in front of yours, you use Deb Dana's words of glimmers, things that help support the nervous system, but ultimately having a connection with another that sends those things that you're valued and cared for. But the connection with somebody else is utmost importance. And I think just when you look about evolutionary biology, how our nervous systems have evolved, and we are tribal beings, that we thrive when we're able to connect with others.
And look at when we don't.
Yeah.
I think we've learned so much about attachment and connection by the science of neglect. If you look about all the research that was, I would say don't Google this, people, but if you look at all the research on Romanian orphanages and what happens when we don't have a human being to connect to, my gosh, that research is so powerful, because we know that you can have no social connection. You can have your physical needs met, but if you look at some of the research out of the science of neglect, if you've experienced the beginning of your life with no human touch, with no one who's attuned to you, and you're removed from that environment before the age of 2, and you are put with someone who loves and cares for you, and a foster family who can give you that connection and safety and love, you can recover within like 4 or 5 years. The whole nervous system can be rewired for connection when you've never had it. Like it's so powerful what one nervous system can do, healing and recovering another. But without it, it's almost like the kids in these studies who never got a safe attachment or a secure attachment or love, and were in these orphanages for years and years and years, they didn't recover. Their brains didn't recover. Their nervous system didn't recover. But just like, I think, we always believe in EMDR that memory is underlying everything, and every human being can heal and recover because we can all process memory. We all have an amygdala, a hippocampus. Our brains are the same. But I think what Stephen Porges does is it gives us hope as well, and polyvagal theory is that our nervous systems can also recover too. We can rewire our nervous system for love and safety and connection, if we know how.
Yeah.
I just had a thought as well, Joanne, like the stabilization phase, you're saying, in EMDR, what do we do? And there's a lot of arguments about we don't, for even complex trauma, we can use the standard protocol without an extended stabilization phase. I think that is true if a client has a social connection that's safe, someone who loves and cares for them. Even with the most complex clients, if you have somebody in their life who truly loves and cares for them, and that's felt in their nervous system, that means they are more regulated, and it means they have a level of self-compassion. There's someone giving them the message that, whatever happened wasn't their fault. They're loved and cared for. It doesn't matter how horrific the trauma is. And I've seen this. It can be the most extensive, horrible child abuse, domestic violence, so adult child. If they have a loving connection that's felt, if they can regulate their body, if they can see with self-compassion, their history and their self-worth, they can process anything. So you don't need an extended stabilization phase. What extends the stabilization phase is isolation.
Right.
What do you think? You think about your clients?
Yeah. And actually, I don't have the book in the room with me, but I think the gentleman's name is Dr. Dan Brown. He's done a lot of research in adult trauma, post-traumatic stress, and did a lot of work with individuals who had been impacted by priests. He did a lot of work with that. I think he was on the Royal Commission, doing all the interviews with the victims, and so they collected like huge amounts of information and data on tests on people's status, and I come across his work on a podcast interview, which I'll post at the end of today, because I will find it, because it's fascinating, and I actually ended up buying his book because his work was so interesting. But what his work found was that individuals who had these years of abuse by a trusted but a religious calling, that as adults who presented with post-traumatic stress and all the other comorbidity, health-related conditions that went with those, or other mental health conditions that went with that trauma, that what he found was that there was almost like this sort of splitting, that the individuals, when they went back and really looked at their history, those individuals who had a close attachment, significant attachment early on before they went into the living environment with the
the abuse.
Yeah, the abuse.
Yeah.
The ones who did not have a secure attachment from a family member going in, that secure attachment actually built in the resilience in their nervous system. So what they actually dealt with was primarily they were presenting with post-traumatic stress, and they had some tendencies of these other comorbidities, but their actually treatment approach was based on processing the trauma, where the individuals that still presented with post-traumatic stress and all, they actually were more significant in a lot of the other comorbid diagnoses, but their treatment was not effective if you focused on the processing, that you actually had to work on build the attachment first before you could then go and do processing kind of work. So again, another powerful information about why we're wired to connect and why that system is a powerful one for us to tap into to help create the safe, so then we can do the work to do the healing and I think creates that shifts in the autonomic nervous system in the brain, so you can ground the nervous system so the work can be done, so people can move along those healing. So,
and everyone knows that, don't they, Joanne? I think if you think about those words that you've just said, like we are wired to connect, like and Stephen Porter says all the time, it's a biological imperative. Like our early history matters. Our body remembers everything. It's an EMDR thing, but the brain is actually relational. Like as human beings, we are innately relational human beings, and trauma disrupts that, doesn't it? So if we have relational trauma, abuse by clergy, abuse by our caregivers, our nervous system is wired for disconnection then, because the disconnection is a protective factor. So we are wired to connect, but if our connections hurt us, then disconnection becomes a survival strategy. And it's not that we don't want to connect. And I think the biggest challenge that I ever feel in EMDR trainings is it's mainly in the I guess not so much the child trainings, because I think we all know that children need another human being to protect them and keep them safe. But if I present this idea that the most important thing in the preparation phase is this attachment to someone, and I'm not talking about a secure attachment, someone who cares about them. That means they're more regulated. It means they get positive messages about themselves and so forth. It's a little bit challenged because, I think people say things like, my client doesn't want anyone. They don't need anyone. Or is a dog okay? Like, what about? And I was like, well, we really need, like as human beings, we need human connection. And I think what tends to happen is that if there is no human connection, you'll just struggle with the memory processing phase for so many reasons. Our clients need someone to hold them outside of the session. They don't need someone to talk about their trauma therapy work with, but they need to have the message leaving the session that I'm safe in the world, that there's someone who cares about me. I can pick up the phone. If you open up memory processing in the session and you have a safe connection with them and you're regulating them, you're taking them to fight and flight and shut down, but you're holding them coming back to ventral. We're processing memory in that way. And then they leave and they go out to the world and they sit in their room all by themselves, hiding away with no one. In terms of memory reconsolidation, that work's going to be undone because you've done this beautiful working session and they've gone home and they've gone into a state of fight and flight or shut down, processing stops and they're alone, and the messages come in like, no one cares about me, I'm unloved. And those messages will be stored away in a memory reconsolidated way with the work you've just done.
And exactly how we talk about the Safe and Sound protocol, that it isn't just an intervention, the acoustic intervention you put on your child and say, you sit there and do that, and the parent goes off and does the stuff. And it isn't just even the parent or a caregiver sitting with the child through the actual listening time, and then they go off and then regular routines where they're not really engaging or shifting those interactions, because the magic happens. The tools that we offer create the opportunity in the nervous system, and the magic happens in the interactions afterwards. And I just wanted to add a little bit to what you sort of said before about, that our brains are wired to connect, and really our bodies. It's we kind of, and I fell into that trap because I did, when I lived in the US, I did my board certification in neurofeedback. And so I went through a period where I was very brain centric. It was all about changing the neural patternings in our brain, and that would rewire everything and make things, perfect. When
it does.
It helps. Neurofeedback is very, there's evidence-based. It can make lots of changes, but I think we get better changes, integrated changes, when we do body and brain together. And in terms of connection, our tactile system, from in utero to early development, helps build that safety and connection to others, and to build that safety in our body, so we feel that we can be in the right, proximity with others. That builds that body awareness, so then we can read other people's cues, their bodies of safety.
It is. I think one of the risk factors for trauma, isn't it, is social isolation. Not everyone develops PTSD. We all experience trauma at some level, at some point in our life. The people who do develop PTSD largely are the ones who are isolated, or who don't have anyone to hear their story, to hold their nervous system. Something bad can happen, but if you can come back to, this is where circle of security comes in. So if you can come back to your secure base where someone can hold you and hear you and feel you, and like if you've had a child, you can feel their nervous system just go down. Like nothing teaches you polyvagal like a pandemic, and this has been on. But as a parent, you know how your nervous system can regulate another, and you don't develop like trauma doesn't embed if you have another human being to share that experience with. But if we do not in our trauma interventions work with the body and the nervous system and create that attachment to someone, what's going to happen is that life will continue to be traumatizing. So you'll have this cycle of people coming back again and again.
This might be a really good time for us to talk about, so obviously you've been reading polyvagal in your career, but then what was it that made you think about doing, completing the Safe and Sound Protocol training?
The Safe and Sound Protocol, I think, it was one particular client that actually made me, you have clients and they make you do a lot of PD, these ones. You think, oh my gosh, what's happening? Why is this not shifting? And there was one particular client, and we had done some intensive EMDR work. So this young boy, he had a history of medical trauma from birth and brain surgery around age 2. Beautiful family, loving, supportive mum. Like he has someone in his life that can hold him and hear him and understand. This little boy was about 10, and he'd had a year of therapy following, a panic attack. So he was actually okay. I think looking back now, we know that he does operate. His home's in shutdown, and you can see why he's had to shut down from birth. How that sometimes the brain, the skull forms too quickly, and the brain grows, so from birth he would have had pressure in his head and crying and that sound, and nothing soothed this child apart from feeding. And then he had surgery, and he found a home in shutdown, obviously. And he's going through life until he had a panic attack. And it's like his nervous system came on, and I guess you'd look at it diagnostically as a delayed PTSD reaction. But had amazing therapy with a brilliant clinician who took like a CBT approach, and then was referred for EMDR. And his nervous system was just on and off, like there was no ventral vagal, and I couldn't get, as soon as we went into the trauma history, it was just he was sucked into this shutdown response, or the panic outside session was just growing and generalizing, and he just became agoraphobic, attached to mum, every level of anxiety there was. So even getting into the nervous system with EMDR was difficult. And again, I don't recommend this often, but we actually medicated him to calm the nervous system. And we did an intensive lot of EMDR. So weekly sessions just wasn't getting any traction. It was like, have a great session, but then the nervous system outside of sessions would just take over again. So we planned for this 2-week intensive treatment where every day we did processing, and the symptoms just fell away day after day, which was great. But there's this underlying level of he still has a home in shutdown, and he still was triggered by little anxieties. And the thing that really got me is this sound sensitivity. He still didn't like going to parties where they would go to things like, iFly, where they go up in.
Yes, yeah.
Or those, what are those places where they go and shoot each other in dark zones? Like, he would avoid those types of parties, didn't like movies. And there was just this sensitivity to sound, and also this need to know where mum was all the time, even though these other symptoms had just dissipated just beautifully. And so in this sense, the Safe and Sound protocol came in after I had, it was kind of in the integration phase, just to shift this. It's almost like his ears were stuck on, like, it's like, how do we get his ears moving again? And he's still, I just didn't actually know what else to do. I'm like, how do we shift this? And I had targeted memories where I thought this sound sensitivity had come from, but it wasn't shifting. So I thought, I've got to do something else. Like, we have to integrate something else. If EMDR is not working, if the evidence-based treatments are not working, what else do we do for these kids? And I don't think he was diagnosable anymore for anxieties and PTSD, but he was functioning and adapting, and he thought he was better. He was kind of frustrated that he was still coming to see me. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm coping. I've done amazing. We're like, you are, but there's still this. It's, when you just want to take everything away for these children. And it was the Safe and Sound protocol, and a beautiful mum. So I did the first session with mum and him, and you can see the connection. You can see the eye contact, the tone of voice. If he's dysregulated, she could hold him. So they did the Safe and Sound protocol just with me checking in throughout the week. And then we saw these things just shift. Like, it's hard to quantify, I think, some of the changes that you see of the Safe and Sound protocol, but he didn't worry about where his mum was anymore. She was allowed to go to the shops. There was things that questionnaires don't even really pick up on. And some of the changes that I've seen with kids that have used the Safe and Sound protocol are things like, teachers say they're just more present. I can't put my finger on it, but they're just more present. They're playing with lots of different kids now. They're eating different foods. They're being more exploratory, and it's like their nervous system just comes down a little bit. Like, they're more focused. They can attend. Their worries, their little worries, just kind of dissipate, but in a way that questionnaires quite often don't pick up. Like,
right.
Do you see that as well?
Oh, exactly. Yeah. And it's that, it's the things, as you say, one day, hopefully, we'll have more sensitive tests but you're right. It's the presence, it's the eye contact, it's that sort of sense of energy where
the tantrums, they're not
more alive, or just being more alive, that they actually find living more fun, that they don't have
more
this
creative.
More
imagination. I get that from teachers that have said that about these kids.
But you're right. I think it's that sense of being safe in your body, so then you can be safe in the world. And those other sort of unconscious barriers that stopped you being creative or being able to be social. Or
you can't be creative in a fight and flight or shutdown, can you? You have to be in a state of ventral to be able to do that.
That's so lovely that he had a nice response.
Oh, but you know what, Joanne? It wasn't all nice. Like, I think this is a warning sign too. I think, once you open up the nervous system, it's not all roses there, is it? Like, for this little boy, he had very big reactions during the protocol, and you know, and you always, as a therapist, try things out yourself before you give it to clients. And my own daughter, who had intense ear infections, medical trauma, you know, 5 sets of grommets, like, and lived at the top of, you know, her window of tolerance. Like it was just her nervous system's on. And she did have a little bit of CBT, and I've snuck in a bit of EMDR. But it's just this, the nervous system, when you open it up, the good and the bad is there, isn't it? Like, you know, the window of tolerance, or the social engagement system, is to be able to tolerate all emotion. And once you open that up with kids, oh my gosh, in the protocol, the sadness that comes out, or the anger that comes out, but you just stop, don't you? And then you regulate and you hold, and you're there. It's like they're coming out of shutdown into a fight and flight, and then they come to you. And the difference is that you're there to hold that, because coming out of shutdown is terrifying if there's no one to see it. But the protocol is retraining their nervous system, isn't it, to come into that social engagement system, which for some kids, like this little boy, that is a complete new way of seeing and feeling the world. And that's kind of terrifying. And there was big meltdowns for a week after, which I see as a positive, because that's better than shutdown. And now we can learn to regulate that. He just hasn't learned to feel the world and see the world that way.
Perfect.
Perfect
said, yes.
Is
and as you say, it brings in the energy. It brings in the energy and for something for us to work with, to then take in some of those other strategies to help sort of contain that, or shape it, you know, whatever kind of word you want to use.
Yeah.
But you're right. And sometimes when you create these shifts in the nervous system, you know, it can look a little muddy for a little while. But, and this is where the education, if we want to use similar sort of phases of, you know, an analogy of EMDR with, you know, the preparation phase, but, you know, and as we're really expanding our safe and sound protocol training in, you know, the safe before the sound, is so important to give that education to family and to caregivers, so they understand that these shifts and changes may happen, and that it's so important for their nervous system to stay in that grounded ventral vagal state, so that safe connection for the nervous system is just a little unstable as it kind of reorganizes itself. And it's, you know, the stable nervous system is sending those neuroceptive messages to the one that's a little bit sort of feeling a little bit sort of not as grounded, that it's going to be okay, and subconsciously helps that nervous system get organized again.
Yeah, because this little boy, his nervous system interpreted excitement of a football game as the same as, you know, panic and terror and fear. Like, a lot of our feelings feel the same, but some are safe and some are not. It takes time to work that out if you've never been online. Like,
and part of that is that vagal, you know, vagal break, or understanding as soon as your heart is that understanding what sympathetic can be good, and sympathetic can be scary. But it's just helping the nervous system sort of differentiate the emotion that goes with the physiology changes.
Yeah, but I think the most beautiful thing is, you know, we do a lot of dyadic work. When you work with kids, I'm thinking, when I'm talking to you, I've got children in mind at the moment, but gosh, it's a whole nother amazing world when you think about SSP for adults too. I'll get to that. But with children, you are teaching parents about the nervous system. And most of us in the planet, like everyday language, we know fight and flight and calm, but most parents don't understand this shutdown response. And I think SSP gives you that inroad of explaining the nervous system to parents and seeing behaviour as always protective. Your kids are always reacting in a way that is protective to them. So their perception, it's helping parents see from their child's point of view, to look through the child's nervous system, to see how they're perceiving the world, and teaching them the subtleties of, you know, the eye contact, the tone of voice, the gesture. Like, it's beautiful dyadic work, SSP, and to see it in the room, and to be able to do the sessions in therapy with them. And I don't know about you, but most kids who have SSP, they love it. My own kids still ask me to use the headphones all the time. It's like, can we go to use the headphones? I'm like, no, you're fine. But just having an hour a day or 15 minutes or half an hour with your child uninterrupted, that's priceless for most of us in this busy world. And it's retraining the joy of that, and to see that reconnection, to play board games.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that as part of my study was, with mums, primarily mums, but some dads were in, and I did the 5 1-hour protocol implementation.
Yeah.
And the amount of parents that, because there was no phones, there was just being present with your child. Yeah, just being present with your child. And the amount of parents who sort of shared afterwards of like, it was just so wonderful that we actually started to try and do some game nights on the weekend.
Yeah.
You realise we actually really enjoyed doing puzzles, and that they said it kind of gave me the permission, and I saw to do that, spend that non-distracting time with my child, and I saw how much my child benefited from that, and how much I benefited from that. So they tried to actually make a commitment to do things like that after they completed the study. So, and I think you're exactly right. And I think there's a lot to be said with, there's so much more knowledge about mental health and resources, particularly in Australia. I mean, Australia has some amazing resources for mental health, and but the prevalence is continuing to skyrocket. Even though we start to have mindfulness in the schools, in some schools, we have to have more and more awareness at younger ages. The incidence is skyrocketing. It's becoming evident more in younger and younger, populations.
Yeah.
And kids being prescribed anti-anxiety medications, and I think a big component is just what we've accepted as how life should be. Being busy. And I fell into that track, when my kids were young, the pressure of taking them to, that they were missing out if they didn't have after school activities every day, and they were in numerous sports, and that you felt that pressure as a parent to keep them, to do. And
where's the be, just being with your child.
I know.
That's
and if I knew now what back then, I would have done it so different, really would have. And I mean, I've got 3 kids and they're amazing, but I think they could be, it could be better if I'd done it a little different. So I think there is, as you said, there's so much to be said, part of our work. And sometimes it just feels like it's just lifestyle stuff, but it makes massive changes.
Yeah. Every human being has the same memory system and the same biological nervous system. We all need connection, and we're comfortable with our home being fight and flight and busyness and then exhaustion. Like that's not what our kids need. That's not what we need either. We need to slow down. We need to create that being with. And that's the difference. I think, in EMDR for years, I've always said to parents and children, how do you know? How does your child know that they love you? How do they, how do you know mum loves you? Oh, she makes me lunch and she buys me clothes and she gives me toys. I'm like, but okay, so when do you feel their love? And you ask that to parents as well. It's like, when do you think they feel your love? And this is blankness. It's like, and the kids can't answer. Like, there's no felt sense of being loved. Like, I know I am, but my nervous system doesn't feel it. And I think SSP is, if you try and set homework, in the past I've set homework of just spending 5 minutes a day with your child, letting them direct play and just be with your child. That's really hard. But what SSP gives is a solid foundation to, like, nope, you have to sit with your children with the headphones for an hour a day or half an hour a day. So it gives some framework to that being with your child for that amount of time. And seeing their nervous system come back online, I think it puts parents in that bigger, wiser. They're part of the healing process. It's empowering. And I think parents get just as much out of this protocol than as kids as well.
Yeah, well, it's a whole dynamic that we're helping. And so with your being said, then you'll be happy to hear that the protocol is actually being expanded into kind of pathways. We're having 3 pathways where the protocol, we're going to have a preparatory phase of listening, and there's 3 different music protocols that are available as a kind of where we can use the protocol and use that time as the teaching time about our social engagement system, about time, and to really sort of prepare the nervous system for the actual core intervention afterwards. Okay. So I think it sort of gives us that time to sort of build that psychoed and that awareness. So then going through the core SSP intervention, for some children may be more, or for some nervous systems may be less challenging because they've had this experience of listening and preparatory. So then the SSP core, and then we're going to have SSP balance, will be lightly filtered music to help with maintenance and maintaining that integration. So there'll be, and to continue with those times where parents sit with their kids and spend that time, and to really, how that sort of takes 21 days to wire in these new changes. So I think having this period of SSP balance will continue that conversation and that work about helping families building these dynamics in their in their day-to-day. Which will,
and I do that the way you've described that. I use within EMDR framework, it is a little bit how I'm using SSP. Is I'm using it at the beginning of therapy with some clients. I'm sometimes using it in the middle when I've realized that there are a lot of blocks in processing. We've done a history. I may have done some processing that's easy. It's just about fear, but then it's opened up this whole history, and I've really understood, the history even further, because EMDR is not a phase 1 to 8 where you go linear through the protocol either. I'll do a bit of preparation and history and case conceptualization. I'll target a symptom, beautiful, but now all this other history's popped up and I'll have to do a bit more preparation. So for a client at the moment, we've done a bit of work, and now her and her 2 mums have the Safe and Sound protocol, and I've just realised the power of, she was prematurely born, she was in an IC unit, new symptoms have come to light, the history's got more complex, and there's a lot more history to do with her learning and sensory issues with clothes that have popped to the surface. So SSP has given me a new way of looking and taking history. My history is quite different since integrating SSP, the things I'm asking clients to look at the nervous system sensitivity. And for some clients, we have done that top up at the end. I think I'm doing day 3, 4 and 5 again after a month has passed. So I think there's a place. One of my colleagues in Melbourne as well is using SSP with clients with DID in the preparation phase. And I could talk to him for hours about this. But with adult clients, and from the protocol, that it opens up your nervous system, and part of the preparation work is spending time with her listening, but just 5-10 minutes at a time, and then regulating 5-10 minutes. So he's building up the ventral vagal system in a very titrated, pendulated way. And I think EMDR is a titrating, pendulating way of processing memories. So, and it's not linear. So we can fit the SSP protocol in to whenever in that process clients really need it or would benefit most. We can be so flexible and creative. It's exciting, isn't it, Joanne? I get a little bit excited.
It is exciting. No, good. So I'm looking at the time, and I really value everything you've shared so far. So at this point, what would you think, would you have any advice or tips for EMDR therapists who might be interested to learn more about the Safe and Sound protocol, or how they think it might even fit into their model? I mean, obviously you've shared quite a bit, but any things pop to mind?
Gosh. Oh, absolutely, John. I feel I'm going to market you here. I think And if you're working with trauma and you're working with complex trauma, you are working with the body. You're working with the nervous system. So familiarising yourself with polyvagal. There's lots of talks around at the moment, isn't there? Stephen Porges, but Deb Dana's books I would clearly recommend. I love her latest one. Is that Safety and Connection? Polyvagal Safety and Connection. Is that her latest?
I've not had a chance to read that one as yet. No.
It's beautiful. It's just taking half the book is about theory on polyvagal, and the other half is just little exercises that you can do with your clients to understand the nervous system, and then to catch a glimmer of ventral vagal every day. So it's a new way. Because I think in EMDR, we think, oh my gosh, clients have to have connection in order to regulate and have that co-regulation to process. But you can't just ask clients to connect. Like their whole nervous system and their body, we're missing a step in EMDR is we have to understand why the nervous system isn't allowing that connection. So before we can get connection, we've got to understand the nervous system and what's going on with yours in relation to another human being. What's the messages you send? What's the message? What's the neuroception? So we have to create perception of neuroception with our clients of any age. And I think learning about polyvagal and the language of it and the nervous system and getting some tools to teach our clients about their nervous system and what's happening in connection before helping them connect. It's like it's a stepped process, and to take that slowly, but it's a process that's not at the beginning of therapy, it's all throughout. So learning about polyvagal and getting some tools and tricks of the trade from someone like Deb Dana, doing the SSP training is it's amazing in and of itself. And I think the assessments that you use in SSP training and the questions that are asked in those questionnaires have really reshaped my history taking and what I'm asking clients to understand their nervous system from birth. I think that's SSP. Yeah, I definitely.
And in terms of your actual process of therapy, I mean, do you feel like the Safe and Sound protocol has added, like, not that you want to think you want to speed up the process, but do you feel like it's helping you work through the process more efficiently than what maybe you have in the past? Or
it's really helping me with that. It's a tool in my toolbox that I will never live without. It's something that I'll always have available to my clients now, and I think it can benefit at any stage of EMDR. And I think the value that I see most particularly at the moment with the young clients I've worked with is it's a science of attachment, and it's the dyadic work that happens not only in session but out of session with SSP. It's one of those tools that you think, oh my gosh, how did I ever work without this? And it's getting to things in EMDR at the end of therapy, that these underlying things that just aren't shifting for some reason. And it is because their nervous system or the muscles in their ears. I don't think EMDR really retrains the ear muscle. So it's another trick to the trade, and it's definitely a tool. And I've recommended many therapists, whether they work with children, adolescents, or adults, even complex DID clients, to check out the protocol and to give it a go themselves. I mean, we can hire the protocol ourselves and give it a go. And I just think using it on myself and my own children who are 2, 5 and 7, just instantly, I feel like I'm selling this here, but so I get too excited. It's like, if you try it out for yourself and just see the shifts and feel the shifts, I think you're sold if you do that and try that out. And the research is there. I think this is a stabilization technique, and Stephen Porges has done the research, and you're doing research, and we can see that this is a technique that has a scientific basis to it, and it's founded on 30. How many years has Stephen Porges been researching polyvagal theory? This is not a gimmicky that will just pass. It's a solid scientific evidence-based technique that will give us something in the preparation phases that we've not had before.
And there's more, and there's other clinical trials underway in the US and Canada as well, and I'm sure there's going to be added. I've actually just recently made a connection, and they work with, it's been a little while since I've read through the information, functional neurological disorder.
Yeah.
And so they have a team there, the mind and brain team, that specialise working with that, and it's with children and adolescents. And she shared with me some videos, and some of these children present looking like they've got a stroke or they've got seizures.
Wow.
She showed me one of a child who almost looked like she was like semi-comatose. And essentially it's like it's an accumulated, the science around it, it's almost like an accumulated stress response on the autonomic nervous system in the brain. And that's the way that they've coped. I mean, adults have the condition as well. Historically, they were, a lot of women tend to be diagnosed more than males. And so they would historically diagnosed with hysteria or, malingerers or, just sort of those, the medical profession can't find a cause for the neurological conditions that's shown, but it just what she shared. And I mean, so obviously children aren't going to be watching people seizure and mimic it. It is purely it's their neurological, their autonomic nervous system way of coping with an accumulated stress response.
That can't be released in any other way.
No,
it was just this week for a child that has seizures, and it's a stressful life history and medical trauma, and there's no medical explanation for these seizures. And when do they happen? And they were describing it just sounds like, I haven't met this child yet, but it's just a nervous system response with no other way out. There's no one to hear me, hold me.
When we get done, I can share the name of this doctor, because this is an area of specialization for her, and she actually has written a few papers, and they're starting to use the Safe and Sound protocol at the hospital. We're completing training with her team, and we're going to do a series of case studies, which will just be absolutely fascinating, because this is such a unique population, but it's an autonomic nervous system that's been overloaded with stress, and this is the way that it's showing. But she's written a paper, the defense response, and really weaves in polyvagal, but really just, unbeds neurologically, the whole defensive response in our nervous system. So, and I'll put a link to that paper in the show notes as well. But Sarah, thank you for your time. It has been just amazing what you've shared. It's been, you present this material, and your excitement is just.
Well, thank you for doing the research. It's and putting this out there and available to clinicians,
to people and stuff. I really hope everyone enjoyed this episode. Sarah does an amazing job of blending the polyvagal theory and the Safe and Sound protocol within the EMDR approach. If you happen to have any EMDR trained colleagues, please share this episode with them. It is almost the end of the year, one that I know many of us are looking forward to leaving behind. This is my last episode for 2020. So please send any suggestions, things you would like to hear more about or learn more about to me. You can post them on the Safe and Sound Protocol Facebook group, or you can email me at the SSP Podcast 1@gmail.com. Here's to a happy new year, to a great 2021, and I look forward to seeing you all next year. If you'd like to learn more about the Safe and Sound protocol in Australia and New Zealand, please contact Integrated Listening Australia. The website is integratedlistening.com.au. And for the rest of the world, please contact Unite Integrated Listening at integratedlistening.com.